The cock crowed before the sky learned its colors. Paulina rose with it, slipping from the raffia mat while the house still breathed in sleep. A thin ribbon of blue-gray light leaked through the wooden shutters. Outside, somewhere in the dark, a moto coughed, the dog 2 compounds away barked once, and silence pulled the town back in like a blanket. She tied her headscarf, dusted her palms with flour, and leaned over the dough like a prayer. Her mother, Mama Leah, worked beside her without words the way they did most mornings. A soft slap of palms against dough, the metallic whisper of the oven door, the hot rush of air. This was the liturgy of their small kitchen. On the wall, soot framed the faded photograph of Paulina's late father holding a tray of loaves, eyes crinkled, smile bright as the fresh crust. Paulina, you take the first basket," Mama Leah murmured, voice warmed by the oven. "School will not wait for a baker." "I know, Maman." Paulina's grin was hidden in the steam. She arranged the bread, baguettes brown just so, small round loaves like suns, a few sugared beignets, nestled them with cloth to keep their heat. The smell, butter and yeast in childhood mornings, wrapped her as she stepped into the dawn. The town was waking, a woman sweeping crimson dust into disciplined lines, a boy chasing a rooster with laughter breaking the hush, the distant thrum of a generator. Across the road, jacaranda leaves made a lace of shadow, purple blossoms scattered like blessings. Paulina's sandals whispered over grit. She passed the tailor's stall, the mechanic's yard, and the taxi rank where yellow cars idled under the gaze of half-asleep drivers. "Bonjour, Paulina," one called. She lifted a hand, the basket steady on her hip, and smiled without breaking pace. She turned into the small square by the council office, their selling place since her father. There, on a concrete bench under the shade of a flamboyant tree, sat a boy she did not know. No, he was a man really maybe 3 years her senior, posture folded softly over a sketchbook. He was thin in a way that spoke of concentration more than hunger, with a careful face and shy shoulders. The pencil in his hand fluttered, paused, pushed again. He looked up only when the scent of the bread found him. "Bonjour," he said, too quick, eyes flicking to her and away. She saw a low blush creep along his cheek. How much for one, please?" 200, she answered, then didn't know why she added, "but for the first customer." She lifted a warm loaf, split the seam with a practiced pry and let the steam curl up. "Take. For luck." He blinked, surprised. "I didn't bring small change." "I didn't ask," she said lightly and placed the bread into his hands. Their fingers brushed. A spark, perhaps from the oven's memory, jumped along the edge of her skin and then was gone. He fumbled a thank you, hid it in a half-smile and tore a soft piece free. His shoulders sank with relief. "What's your name?" Paulina asked because the question felt like tapping a door. "Alain," he said. "And you are?" "Paulina?" His gaze darted to the little sign her father painted long ago, "Paulina and Maman, Pain-See." She laughed. "Caught." He angled his sketchbook away, then toward her, nervousness wrestling with pride. I was drawing the square. You came through. It's not finished." She leaned, curious, and saw herself in faint strokes. A girl, a basket, dawn pinned around her like a shawl. It wasn't pretty in the manner of photographs. It was alive in the manner of things you love. "I look taller," she teased, pleased to see him relax into a smile. "Maybe that's how I saw you," he said softly, and the words carried a weight that made her heart beat twice. Customers trickled in, the nurse who worked nights, the teacher with his slow step, 3 giggling schoolchildren who whispered, "Auntie Paulina," like a rhyme. She moved like a song through them all, pinching change, nodding hellos, throwing in a sugared beignet for the smallest child because generosity was the first ingredient her mother taught her. Between sales, she glimpsed Alain, elbows propped on knees, eating his bread as if tasting a memory. He sketched again. Whenever she looked, he looked away. Whenever she turned, she felt his gaze touch lightly the way a breeze finds the nape. When the bell at lycée billing rang faintly across the roofs, Paulina packed the last loaves for the market lady who'd come late, covered the basket with cloth, and slung her school bag across one shoulder. She should go. Exams were a month away. The road to her dreams ran through equations and essays, not the square. Still, she paused at the bench. "Tomorrow," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Come early. I will bring you pain au chocolate if Maman is generous." He laughed with his eyes more than his mouth. "I will draw better." "Then it is a trade," she said. As she left, he called, a little braver, "Thank you, for the bread." Paulina didn't turn, but her smile widened as the town brightened. The sun was up now, the road full. She walked quicker, dust rising, heart oddly light, as if some small warm loaf had been placed there too, a free gift for luck. Alain came earlier the next morning as if punctuality could make up for shyness. He wore the same neat shirt, washed and sun-bleached, sleeves rolled to the forearms. On the bench lay his sketchbook and a small tin pencil sharpener, the kind a boy would keep from primary school for luck. When Paulina arrived, he stood, then sat, stood again, and finally pretended to adjust his pencil like a man fixing a radio he already knew worked. "You are early," she said, setting the basket down. The steam lifted as if greeting him. "You said, pain au chocolate," he replied, almost solemn. She laughed, took 2 pastries from the cloth, one for him, one for her, and sat on the far edge of the bench. The flamboyant tree salted them with 1 or 2 red petals. Alain took a careful bite and made a small sound that might have been a thank you or a song. "What do you draw?" Paulina asked around a mouthful. "Only benches and squares?" "Mostly faces," he said, then added quickly, "not in a creepy way." "Good to know." She tilted her head. "Where did you learn?" "My father mends shoes. He says I learned by watching air. At the market I used to sit and look. When he chased me to the bookshop I looked at the covers. At church I looked at hands." He shrugged, embarrassed at how many hours his eyes had stolen. "I didn't have money for paper. I drew in the margins of everything." "Even in the margins drawings can be whole," Paulina said. She surprised herself with the thought, then hid her surprise by arranging loaves. "Do you sell them?" He shook his head. "Who will buy a face they can already see?" He lifted the sketchbook as if to test its weight. "Sometimes the tailor pays me with thread. Sometimes the mechanic gives me a ride. It is enough." Paulina wanted to tell him that enough felt thin on the tongue. But she knew the economy of this town. Favors leaned on favors, and love, when it came, would likely arrive in kind and careful gestures. She nodded, as if she could repay his honesty with respect. "Can I draw you properly?" he asked, voice barely above the creak of leaves. "I mean, if you have time. I can work quick." She glanced toward the school's direction. The bell had not yet rung. "Quick then," she said, and smoothed her headscarf. He looked, and for the first time she felt seen past the market version of herself. Not the girl with change in a basket, not the daughter who carried duty like a second loaf, but the person who dreamed in lines and faith. His eyes traveled not in possession but in study, the small scar on her chin from when she fell off a mango tree, the curve of her cheek where laughter liked to live, the way her mouth thought before it smiled. She tried not to move. She failed twice when a moto backfired and a baby somewhere decided to explain the world in cries. Alain never scolded the interruptions. He took them as part of her shape, pencil catching the wiggle of breath, the shift of weight. He worked with a softness that felt like being trusted. "Done," he said after fewer minutes than she expected. He turned the sketchbook around. A girl sat on a bench that was also a morning, hands on her knees, chin tipped toward some invisible horizon. The lines were truthful but kind. He had given her the height of her courage. The bench had the wear of generations, and somehow in the hatchings behind her shoulder, he'd suggested the ghost of a baker's hand, the father who was gone, the mother who remained. It was not a portrait. It was a promise. Her throat tightened. Alain. She couldn't find the right currency for gratitude. So she paid him the way she knew. She wrapped 1 baguette in brown paper, added a sugared beignet, then, after a second's rebellion, slid in a second beignet. "For your father," she said. "And for the boy who learned from air." He laughed softly. "He will say thank you with grease on his fingers." "Grease is also gratitude," she replied. The bell rang, dragging a ribbon of children down the street. She gathered her basket. Alain stood, awkward, as if he should carry something but could not decide whether it was bread or silence. "I will come again," he said, then seemed to think it too bold and swallowed the words back. "Do," Paulina answered, and gave him a look that settled the matter. "Bring your pencils. I bring the rest." As she walked away, she felt the weight of the sketch in the air behind her, as real as if she carried it in her bag. It was strange and good to be rendered. It made her spine a little straighter. It made the future feel like a room she could enter without knocking. The rain arrived like gossip, first a whisper in the leaves, then a hush among the women at the stalls, then a fast, undeniable rush that sent everyone reshuffling their plans. Paulina loved this part. The sudden crispness, the smell of wet dust turning into clay, the way color deepened as if the town had been rinsed clean. She had not brought an umbrella. Habit. The mornings were usually clear when the bakery's hearth still hummed in her bones. Alain saw the gray gather before she did. He closed his sketchbook carefully and lifted his face to the wind like a man checking mood. "Come," he said, gesturing to the tin awning of the tailor's kiosk beside the bench, the one held up by stubborn nails and prayer. It wasn't much, but it was something. They stood shoulder to shoulder under the awning that rattled like a drum. Rain stitched the square into a curtain. Beyond it, the world blurred into generous strokes. Two schoolboys dashed by, whooping. A taxi honked and gave up. The tailor inside looked over his glasses and grinned as if this closeness were his doing. Paulina hugged the basket like a baby. Water beaded her forearms, glistened along the line of her jaw. Her scarf darkened to a deeper blue. "Maman will scold me for getting wet," she said, half laughing. "We should dry your hands," Alain murmured. He tore a clean square from the brown bread paper he always seemed to keep, then hesitated, as if the act required permission not from her but from all the elders who sat invisibly in the square, sipping tea in judgment. She held out her hands. "Artist, do your worst." He dabbed gently, the paper drinking raindrops. As he worked, the chatter of the rain filled the spaces where words were shy. He dried each finger with care, the way a scribe might tend a quill. When he reached her wrists, his breath stuttered. She felt it, and something inside her answered with an echo. He stopped, respectful, and stepped back just enough to be proper. That millimeter might have been a mile. "You're kind," she said. "You're brave," he replied. "Giving free bread in a world that counts." "Sometimes counting isn't the only math," she said, and he smiled, pencil light. The tailor coughed a theatrical cough that meant he was pretending not to watch. Outside, the rain slackened into a silver veil. Paulina shifted and the scarf slipped. Without thinking, Alain reached to set it right. His fingers brushed the fine hairs near her ear, and chaos bloomed in both their chests. He drew his hand back as if from flame. She looked up at him, eyes searching not for answers but for truth. "We're getting rained on," she said, although they were mostly dry now. It was an invitation or a warning or both. "I can draw it," he said softly. "The way your lashes hold the drops. The way your mouth refuses to be serious." "I am very serious," she replied, trying and failing to hold a stern face. Her lips curved, betraying her. "Me too," he said, and then something shifted. Perhaps the rain's music changed key, perhaps the awning decided to be a roof, perhaps time took a breath, and he leaned a fraction closer. Not enough for scandal. Enough for a promise to ask a question. She met him halfway, but only halfway, placing her forehead against his in the plainest intimacy there is, eyes closed, the world stilling around their small, soft courage. It was the kind of touch that did not demand proof, only presence. Their breaths mingled, did the arithmetic of two becoming a rhythm. "We should go," she whispered after a while, not moving. "We should," he agreed, not moving. When they finally parted, the square had washed itself into freshness. Children leapt from puddle to puddle, as if inventing new continents with each splash. The tailor pretended to be absorbed in a hem. Paulina adjusted her scarf, picked up the basket, and looked at Alain with a confidence that surprised them both. "Walk me to the school gate?" He nodded, and they stepped out together into the soft aftermath, shoes darkening, laughter brief and bright as birds. He kept to her left, the way men in old stories did when they wanted to be a small wall against any large world. She did not mention it, but she felt the gesture thread itself into her. At the gate, with the bell somewhere between insistence and threat, they paused. He opened his sketchbook and in 5 quick lines, caught the umbrella-less stubbornness of her day. "For you," he said. "Proof that you survived the rain." "I didn't just survive," she said. "I was seen." They traded their shyest smiles and then she ran, late but lifted, leaving a wet footprint anthem all the way to the classroom. On Saturday, Alain followed the scent of sugar to the courtyard behind the bakery, where palm fronds made a green lattice against the glare. Paulina had invited him to see where mornings were born. Mama Leah hesitated when she saw him. Mothers possess a radar for new weather, but her eyes softened at the sight of the sketchbook tucked like an honest confession under his arm. "You are the one who draws," she said. "And you are the one who has made my daughter walk as if she carries a secret." She let the sentence hang long enough to ensure both the joke and the warning entered their bones. Then she smiled and handed Alain an apron that had seen battles and won most of them. "Wash hands. If you are here you will work." They fell into the kitchen's rhythm. Paulina kneaded and folded, the dough pliant under her palms, the heel of her hand pressing, the stretch and tuck a choreography taught by mothers to daughters to daughters. Alain dusted trays, watched, asked, learned where to stand so as not to be in the path of oil or heat or authority. Flour found his hairline, butter perfumed his hands. He laughed when the mixer hiccuped and flung a white kiss onto his shirt. "You see," Paulina said, smearing a neat line of flour along his forearm as if awarding him a stripe. Now you belong to the dough. He looked at her the way men look when belonging feels like both a gift and a responsibility. Let me earn it, he said, and turned to the sign that had faded over the years, Paulina and Maman, pansy letters ghosting on wood. He measured the board with a tailor's tape, pencil behind his ear. May I? Mama Leah squinted at him, saw the sincerity, and nodded. Do it well. Your work hangs over my bread. Alain sanded the board, wiped it clean and sketched in chalk, a curve here, a flourish there, until the name lay graceful and sturdy, readable from across the road and pretty from near. He painted in a deep, honest blue, the color of Paulina's scarf, edged with a white that caught the light. When he added a tiny wheat sheaf between the names, a symbol for partnership, Paulina felt heat rise her neck. It was such a small thing, and yet the world shifted to make space for it. They ate standing up as bakers do, ends of baguette dragged through a dish of mango jam, sips of sweet tea, laughter broken into work-shaped pieces. Alain tried to return to the sign, but Paulina caught his wrist. Come, she said. I want to show you something. She led him to the far wall, where her father had marked their heights each year with pencil and date. Lines climbed the plaster like a slow, faithful ladder. She placed her palm against the last mark, Paulina, 16, then slid it higher. I didn't let Mama erase them. I said the wall should remember. Alain took out his pencil quietly and, asking permission with his eyes, added a small line, Paulina, 18. He added another to the side, smaller, Alain, 21. They stood with their backs to the wall, aligning themselves with their own measurements, and the silly seriousness of it made them both laugh. But afterward, when the laughter thinned, the meaning remained. We were here at the same time on the same wall. In the late afternoon, when shadows began to lengthen and heat unhooked its grip, he offered her a gift. From his sketchbook, he slipped a page of careful graphite. Paulina bent over a dough mound, brow furrowed in devotion, light from the oven catching her cheekbones. He had somehow drawn warmth, the way her hands belonged to the work and the work belonged to her. She touched the edge. You keep giving me mirrors I recognize, she whispered. I thought only a mother could do that. Sometimes strangers see the edges that family polishes smooth, he said. Sometimes we are brave enough to show each other. She stepped closer, flour still dusting her wrist, and slid her fingers one by one into his flour-dusted hand. The intimacy was gentler than any kiss and more daring. She traced the lines of his palm the way he traced lines on paper, learning the geography, memorizing the river of his lifeline, the sturdy hills of callus where work had taught him patience. He did not move. He let himself be known. From the doorway, Mama Leah cleared her throat in a tone that held both a smile and a rulebook. They jumped apart like guilty songbirds. Art can cool, she said dryly, but bread will not bake itself. That night, when the new sign dried and they hung it above the door, a small crowd gathered. Neighbors with opinions, children with curiosity, the tailor with his measuring tape still around his neck. The sign glowed in the falling light. Someone clapped. Alain stood a little to the side, humble. Paulina caught his eye and pointed upward, to the sheaf of wheat between names. He shook his head as if to say, it's nothing. She shook hers as if to say, it's everything. Under the sign's new blue, they shared a last baguette, tore pieces by hand, and ate with the contentment of people who had made something together and found it good. The woman came in a city dress, the kind of crisp fabric that refuses dust, carried by a pair of heels that had never argued with red earth. She introduced herself as Madame Dory from Douala, consultant, she said as if it were a flavor, and set a business card on the counter like a small, flat gate. The card smelled faintly of perfume and confidence. I heard about your bread, she said, smiling at Mama Leah, then letting her gaze drift to the new sign. And I see you've heard about design. Paulina felt Alain's presence at her shoulder like a steadying hand, though he stood across the room. He was delivering a sketch to the tailor and had stopped to buy bread, or to watch Paulina's morning, or both. We bake what we can, Mama Leah said, polite but not soft. The town had taught her to split sugar from talk. Madame Dory bit into a crusty end and made a pleased sound. You bake what you can very well. In Douala, a new boutique bakery is opening. Artisan breads, local stories, high-end clientele. We want to train a handful of promising young bakers, bring them into the city scene, offer a stipend, housing, the works. We heard of a girl here who sings to her dough and makes the crust listen. Paulina blinked, startled that her small secrets traveled. She glanced at Mama Leah, whose face didn't move, then at Alain, whose face moved too much. Surprise first, then pride, then something like fear that he tried to fold neatly away. "We are honored," Mama Leah said, which meant we are cautious. "What does such a thing require?" "Audacity," said Madame Dory with a neat smile. "And departure. 2 months of training. Then a contract if the fit is right. We would need Paulina in Douala next month. Early mornings, late afternoons. A room in the staff house. A salary that would make your neighbors whisper and your cousins ask for phone money." She laughed like someone used to lighting rooms with sound. "It is an opportunity to change a life." Paulina's pulse skittered. The word Douala bloomed a map in her head. Bridges and traffic and heat, neon signs and polished glass, bakeries with marble counters and people buying bread with their lunch breaks. Exams. Mama. The shop. Alain, who was a new sign in rain and pencil lines that made her spine taller. "What about school?" she heard herself ask, her voice small and practical, the way it was when haggling with the egg seller. "We can arrange classes in the evenings," said the consultant, as if problems were merely scheduling errors. "Do well enough and you might attend a pastry course in Yaoundé next year. With papers." She tapped the card again. "Think of it." When the woman left, the room felt larger and smaller at once. Neighbors lingered to analyze the idea, offering advice disguised as jokes. The tailor said, "City people always speak like rain, loud then gone." The mechanic whistled and said, "A salary that makes cousins call? Dangerous oh." Someone else clapped Paulina on the shoulder as if congratulations were already due. In the quiet that followed, Alain stood by the doorway, hands in pockets. He did not say don't go. He would not trap a bird he admired for flying. But he also did not say go because the thought of the bench without her sat in his chest like a stone. "What are you thinking?" she asked because honesty had become part of their morning bread. "That you deserve every open door," he said. "And that open doors sometimes lead away." She exhaled, relief and ache braided. "I thought I was the only one feeling 2 things at once." He stepped closer. "We can feel them together." They walked to the bench because decisions are easier to consider where beginnings began. The flamboyant tree held its shade like a friend. Alain sat with more stillness than usual, his sketchbook closed as if lines would make promises he could not keep. Paulina folded her hands and watched a lizard do push-ups on a warm stone, absurd and beautiful. "I want the city," she said, finding courage in the lizard's stubborn show. "Not because of the salary, okay, also because of the salary, but because of the learning, the rooms I have not entered. I want ovens that breathe different air. I want to know what I can become when the horizon moves closer." "I know," he said. "I can see it when you need. You push forward even when you pull back." She smiled, embarrassed. "But I also want this." She gestured to the square that was also a story. "I want mornings that have names. I want to be looked at by eyes that learned me before the city could rename me." He didn't take her hand. Sometimes the discipline of not touching is the truest touch. "If you go," he said slowly, "I can wait. Not like a statue, like a garden. I will grow. You will grow. We will send each other proof." "What kind of proof?" she asked, half hopeful, half afraid. He lifted the sketchbook, thumb worrying the edge. "Lines," he said. "And you crumbs." He grinned. "The good kind. In napkins with notes." She laughed and the world loosened a notch. "Deal," she said. Then, with a sudden boldness that surprised even herself, she leaned in and kissed him, soft, certain, a seal pressed hot onto paper. It was the kiss of people who knew their love was quiet and also bright, like embers that choose to glow instead of spit. It was deep in the way truth is deep, uncomplicated, unwavering, kind. When she pulled back, breath a little caught, she whispered, "Let's see what the city wants. But let's also see what we choose." He touched his forehead to hers, a benediction that now belonged to them. In the square, a child yelled for change, a taxi argued with a pothole, and the sign above the door shone its new blue into the afternoon. The future, like dough, had begun to rise. At supper, the compound filled with opinions the way a bakery fills with heat, gradually then all at once. Aunties lined advice on the table beside the cassava like extra plates, slipping proverbs between spoonfuls. A fish that wants to be soup must first agree to the fire. Uncles asked about stipends the way spice merchants test pepper, suspicious and hopeful at once. Cousins giggled, already planning to say, "My sister is in Douala," as if city names were necklaces you could borrow for parties. Mama Leah let the chorus run until the stew cooled and the plantains surrendered, then lifted her spoon and tapped the enamel bowl once. "Eat," she said, eyes resting on Paulina with the quiet that often hides the deepest currents. "There is time to decide when the mouth is not busy." After the dishes, Under a sky with a ragged edge of cloud, Mama folded a cloth with the same care she gave to each day. Your father, she said, voice more memory than sound, once turned down a job in Bafoussam because it wanted his hands but not his family table. He said bread is only good if the baker can still recognize the smell when he gets home. She chuckled, tired and fond. But he also said, if a door opens, at least lean to see the room. I am your mother. I fear the city's teeth. I am your mother. I know your hunger. She put a finger under Paulina's chin, tipping it the way you test a loaf for readiness. Be bold. Be careful. Carry our name like salt, present in everything rarely seen. Alain waited by the gate, the moon hung low enough to overhear. They walked toward the flamboyant, past the tailor's dark kiosk and the mechanic's yard where a radio muttered to nobody. I can want two things, Alain said, voice careful, thumb finding the ridge of her knuckle the way a pencil finds paper's tooth. I can want you to stay because mornings with you have made my life make sense. And I can want you to go because you were born with a forward step. She breathed out, the kind of breath that loosens a chest but tightens a vow. If I go, I'll send proof, she whispered. Crumbs in napkins, notes that smell like cocoa. Photos of ovens I can't stop staring at. He smiled. And I'll send lines. Every face that learns me, every bench that misses you, I'll draw it and post it till the paper complains. Under the tree they practiced goodbye in small, tender rehearsals. He peeled an orange into perfect crescents and offered each slice like a promise. She pressed her forehead to his, how their bodies had learned this benediction still amazed her, and let silence do the thinking two voices would only tangle. The night smelled of wet earth and fried fish from a neighbor's stove, a gecko rasped like a match head in the leaves. Don't let the city rename you, he said into the soft space between them. Keep Paulina inside the chef's cap. She nodded against him. Don't let the town make you smaller, she replied. Grow the mural past the wall. Their kiss was unhurried, a low flame, heat contained, deep, steady, the kind that turns dough into something that can feed a morning. When they parted, they did not say forever or never. They said, tomorrow, then next week, and meant, as long as this tree stands and even when it doesn't. Douala rose at her like a wave with elbows, horns braiding arguments over bridges, market vendors calling papaya prices as if auctioneers of sunlight, humidity slipping into her clothes with the confidence of a regular. The staff house smelled of detergent and ambition. Bunk beds lined a narrow room where girls learned one another's dreams by the kind of size they made in their sleep. Chef Itaundi, broad-chested and exact, led her through machines whose names sounded like impatient Europeans. Spiral mixers, deck ovens, proofers with blinking eyes. Your hands know dough, he said, tapping the metal table. Now your mind must know scale. At home you need a family, here you need a city. Morning began before morning. By 4 she was shaping croissants, each triangle folded into a small promise, butter sighing between layers like a secret kept and kept. The muscle between her thumb and forefinger woke, complained, and learned a new language. She burned a tray of palmiers and stepped into the walk-in freezer to cool her cheeks, felt tears crystallize into resolve. Mireille, second-year trainee with neat braids and a laugh quick as a whisk, bumped shoulders with her on purpose. Bread notices panic, she said, eyes kind. So breathe. The dough will follow. By noon, cinnamon plates came out glossy. By 3, her feet ached like two honest workers. By 8, she lay on a thin mattress and stared at the ceiling fan tracing circles like a thought that won't land. Each night, she messaged Alain, photos of her forearms dusted white, of a loaf so open-crumbed it looked like an airy cathedral, of the woori sun smearing gold across cranes like a painter too in love with light. He replied with sketches, Paulina in a too-big chef's cap, comets of flower orbiting. Paulina on the river rail, city at her back, horizon in her eyes. Paulina's hands, always the hands, drawn with a tenderness that made her chest go quiet. On Sundays she walked to the river and let the water do its stern kindness. Keep going, as if that were the only instruction anyone ever needed. She bought a pineapple from a woman whose machete sang, sent a voice note to Mama about heat like wet cloth, and tucked a folded drawing of their bench into her pillowcase like a relic. Homesickness surprised her not as tears but as smells that ambushed. Kerosene from a roadside tea stall making her think of the kitchen bulb at home, rain on dust outside the bakery reminding her of the awning's drum. In the staff kitchen, Mireille taught her to steal 5 minutes for joy. Tea thick with condensed milk, feet up on a crate, gossip measured like salt. If you become only bread, you will become stale, Mireille warned, flicking sugar at her. A baker must eat sweetness too. Paulina wrote those words on the back of an oven schedule. Later, as she fell asleep, she whispered to the empty bunk above, Keep me soft where I should be soft, strong where I must be strong, and heard in her own voice the echo of Mama's prayers and Alain's pencil talking to paper. The first time Chef let her lead a morning bake, the mixers sounded like engines testing a runway and her chest matched tempo. A line of stainless steel bowls gleamed like moons awaiting a tide. Plan your order of operations, Itaundi said, crossing thick arms, respect disguised as stern. She inhaled, 4 counts, out 6, Mireille's breathing trick, then charted the choreography. Doughs with longer fermentation first, egg wash staged near the final proof, glaze cooled by a cracked proofer door, someone on rotation to watch heat spikes. When panic tapped her shoulder, she greeted it like an old neighbor and put it to work sweeping flour. By 6:30, croissants were proofed. By 7, the first tray slid in. By 7:10, the smell told the whole street to forgive its quarrels and come by mercy in brown. At noon, a young photographer arrived, all denim and directives. Chin down, eyes up. Hold the loaf like you would a story you love but can't keep. They shot in the lobby where glass made everyone shinier. By evening, a poster blinked on the staff notice board, Paulina, our rising star. The words jarred and warmed, like hot sugar on a tongue that expected salt. She sent a photo to Alain with a caption, "They found a title for my face." He replied with a drawing of the same poster, except tiny birds tried to carry it home, wings beating with charming incompetence. She laughed in the stairwell until Mireille leaned out and said, "Share joke or share bread." Saturday, Alain arrived dusty and beaming, backpack heavy with guavas and one carefully wrapped disc of gombo soup that Mama insisted could cross galaxies. They strolled the river's edge where container ships moved like deliberate thoughts and the city's clatter softened into the steady beat of water on hull. "I brought you the square," he said, passing a folded paper. She opened it to the bench under flamboyant shade, drawn from memory so fierce it felt like the tree itself had whispered into his pencil. They ate roasted plantains with pepper, watched boys kick a ball barefoot until dusk turned them into silhouettes, and talked the new talk of people who are building a bridge plank by plank. Schedules, trains, how to mail a loaf without mailing the air that makes it sing. Parting found them in a stairwell that smelled of soap and onions, hands threaded, foreheads leaned together, breaths braided. "I feel 2 people living inside me," she confessed. "One who wants the shiny ovens, one who wants the morning bench." He smiled with that grave sweetness that made her heart settle. "We can be a house with 2 rooms and 1 roof," he said. Their kiss, modest in choreography, profound in message, tasted of guava and relief. After he left, she sat on her bed and let the room be cold around the heat inside her, then wrote 2 lists. What I am learning here and what I refuse to lose. On both lists she wrote, in larger letters, kindness. Rumor runs in bakeries the way steam does, finding every gap, fogging whatever it can. Word spread that 2 permanent contracts were coming, with salaries that made calculators sit up and a clause called exclusivity that made hearts tilt. "It means your face is theirs on posters and your Saturdays maybe your Sundays," Mireille said, weighing dough with the same deliberation she weighed choices. "It means you become a brand, not a person who sometimes needs to lie on her mother's floor and laugh for nothing." Paulina felt the weight of a wrist chain she hadn't put on yet. She pictured the sign at home, blue like promise, wheat between names, and wondered if papers could erase wood. Back in town, Alain was painting a mural on the community center. Hands in motion, pounding fufu, braiding hair, writing sums, stitched across concrete by a river of lines. Aunties brought groundnuts in newspaper cones. Children stood so close their noses almost touched the wet wall. 3 weeks, he texted. Proper brushes. They pay in installments and thanks. Pride came through the wires, fear kept its boots on. On slow connections, their calls lagged and overlapped until they were both apologizing for stepping on each other's sentences like clumsy dancers learning the same song from different bands. Then the city blog posted the training photo, Paulina in her cap, chin down, eyes up, and comments grew teeth like street dogs. She will forget us in 2 weeks. City will eat her softness. Faces for billboards now. Paulina muted the thread, wiped counters harder than necessary, and felt her sweetness retreat behind a door. Alain saw the photo in the tailor's shop and stared longer than was good for his tenderness. Jealousy, a poor draftsman, began sketching monsters in the shadows. Her laughing with men who knew wine words, her saying we about a bakery that would never smell like their kitchen bulb. That night, reception fought weather and still they called. "Do you trust me?" she asked, voice flat from fatigue and people's projections. "Yes," he said, the word tripping on another called afraid. "Do you trust us?" he added, swallowing a pride that wanted to pretend it had no questions. "I do," she said, and then braver, "I also trust the bench. It will remember us if we forget ourselves." They went quiet, the kind that rests rather than punishes. We are learning distance, she said finally. Some days it is a river you can swim, some days it is a road with no shade. On both days we drink water and keep walking. He leaned his forehead to the cool wall by his bed, as if he could borrow their benediction from miles away, and said, "Proof tomorrow?" She smiled, felt the smile reach her breathing. "Crumbs and lines," she promised. Ngondo painted the town in drums and wrappers, the river crowded with oars and intentions. Canoes carved prayers onto water. Elders poured libations with hands practiced in both grief and gratitude. The bakery heated before dawn, and the air turned sweet with sugar melting toward caramel, a scent that makes arguments forget their reasons. Paulina's train hissed her back home just as the first customers began to practice their festival appetites. She tied her scarf, kissed Mama's cheek with flour, and slid into a room that still knew her hands by heart. Alain slipped into an apron, paint still ghosting his nails. They worked a duet, people around them pretended not to watch. She weighed, he whisked, she shaped, he brushed egg wash like blessing. At midnight, while the oven's small window glowed like a patient star, they leaned against the cool wall and let stillness steep. A curl escaped her scarf and clung to her temple. He reached, asking, tucked it back with two fingers that shook a little at the privilege. The quiet after filled with something soft and electric. Their kiss arrived like a low tide, purposeful and controlled, undoing only what needed undoing. The knot between shoulder blades, the tight line in a jaw clenched against longing, the fear that a city could swap out a heart like a part in a machine. Mama Leah entered with a tray balanced on hip and a cough that contained a smile. "If romance burns bread, I sell at double price," she said, and they broke apart, young and guilty and shining. Later, lanterns stitched light along the street as the town ate, laughed, and told familiar stories loudly, the way people do when they want to make joy behave like normal. Alain unveiled his mural beside the council office. A baker's hand meeting an artist's hand. The meeting point turned into a loaf, seam shining. Children traced the line with forefingers. An old man said, "See? This is what happens when work likes company." Paulina felt her chest stretch and ache, the exact sensation of something mending where it had begun to crack. They danced in the square to a band that knew how to make iron pipes sing. Not cinema dance, just shoulder to shoulder, breath to breath, her cheek finding the place under his jaw that had already learned her. Under fireworks that looked cheap up close and like galaxies from far, they pressed foreheads, the world dimming kindly around them. "I go back tomorrow," she said, not as apology but as weather report. He nodded, not as resignation but as a map. "Bring me the city smell on your scarf," he whispered. "I'll wash it into my paint." The contract waited in the manager's office like a polite animal with a strong jaw. Air conditioning hummed a sterile hymn. A pot plant tried and failed to look natural. "Here," the manager said, fingernail tapping clauses as if calling roll. Branding rights, content approvals, event appearances, an exclusivity window that ran its finger down the calendar and claimed weekends like a jealous cousin. "Compensation is generous. We invest in faces that perform." The word perform snagged on Paulina's heart like a nail on a dress hem. She took the papers to the staff kitchen where coffee was honest and sheets of parchment lay like blank decisions. Mireille read over her shoulder, making the small thoughtful sounds of a seamstress cutting tricky cloth. "It is not wicked," she said, "but it is hungry. Ask it to eat slower." Paulina imagined the sign at home, blue, sturdy, a little uneven in a way that kept it human. She pictured Mama tucking hair under scarf, the wall where height marks climbed, the wheat sheaf Alain painted between names. A city could open a room, a signature could close a door she didn't mean to lock. She wrote a list in her notebook titled "What My Life Must Still Feel Like." It included Sundays that smell of river, bench shade, the right to bake with my mother without asking permission from glass. Granted a day to consider, she walked the market for counsel that didn't carry business cards. An old woman selling dole looked at the papers and then at Paulina's face. "Child," she said, "some soups are better when you refuse one more ingredient." A cobbler examined her fingers and told her, "Keep the calluses that know whose door you're knocking." On the bridge, Wind tried to make a speech, she let it. She called Alain. He didn't tell her what to do. He harvested the questions with her, laid them on a cloth, pointed to the ones that might rot if kept too long. "What do you need to stay generous?" he asked. She surprised herself by answering quickly, "Time that is not for sale. A bench that remembers my name. A way to bring the city home instead of moving home into the city's pocket." That evening she drafted a counter. Training and special projects, yes. Exclusivity weekends, no. Content use with consent. 2 days a week reserved for community baking in her town, her name paired with her mother's name on any official mention. She printed it on plain paper that smelled of ink and nerve. Later, alone in her room, she laid both versions side by side and pressed her forehead to her pillow until the old benediction found her. "Keep me honest," she told the ceiling fan. "Keep me mine." By morning, a city food blog had posted her training photo with a headline that put floss on her teeth she didn't have. The comments section performed its familiar circus. Fans throwing flowers, strangers throwing stones, bored people tossing popcorn they didn't pay for. Under a screenshot, a cousin wrote Celebrity O. With fireworks that felt like tiny fists. Paulina shut her phone and kneaded dough like forgiveness. Stretch, fold, willing her heart to keep its softness even as the world pawed at it with both hands. In town, the tailor angled his phone to the whole street. Boys by the kiosk delivered verdicts between gulps of soda. A woman at the water pump said, "Big girl now," with a smile that didn't decide whether to be proud or cautious. Alain watched the photo longer than was wise, then scolded himself the way you scold a cat that already knows better. Jealousy tapped the glass of his chest and made faces. He told it to sit down. It didn't. He painted until dusk fought his colors, then texted Paulina. "You look like you cracked the sun and borrowed a piece." Then after 3 beats, "I'm proud of you. Also, I miss the you who smells like smoke from our oven." They called as rain unstitched itself in both cities, the delay making their yes and mmhms bump heads. "Today I felt famous in a way that made me want to hide behind a sack of flour," she said. "I wanted my poster to peel itself off the wall and come help me wash trays." Alain laughed in that low way that makes joy feel private. "I'm practicing being the kind of man who can clap for you and still hold space for the part of me that panics," he admitted. "It's not pretty yet. But it's honest." She exhaled, relief slipping through her shoulders. "I don't need pretty. I need honest and patient. The rest we can proof." They performed their ritual with screens, their foreheads bowed toward small rectangles as if prayer could travel through pixels. "Bench tomorrow at 5, she said, and when he reminded her they were hundreds of kilometers apart, she answered, "Still. We sit for 10 minutes wherever we are, remember the flamboyant shade, and breathe like we belong." The next day she perched on the back step outside the bakery, traffic arguing beyond, a broom leaning like a tired auntie beside her. He sat on the council office steps, a rooster heckling, rain reinventing the square. For 10 quiet minutes they were under the same tree. Later she returned to the manager with her counterproposal in a neat folder and the kind of balance in her chest people mistake for luck and is actually work. The storm arrived with a purple bruise, split the sky, and slapped the quarter's electricity awake and then to sleep. The bakery's oven blinked confusion, coughed, and went sullen. A wedding wanted 60 loaves by dawn, the kind of order that keeps a family in soap and school shoes. Panic tried the back door. Mama Leah barred it with her hip. "We have hands," she said. "We have fire. We have neighbors." The mechanic fished a generator from behind oil drums. It protested in the voice of an uncle waking from a nap but grudgingly agreed to live. The tailor cut old blankets into insulation jackets. Children formed a relay for water like a game with consequences. Somebody's nephew who flirted with gadgets babysat the thermostat with a joke and a towel. Alain turned cardboard into a battle plan. Arrows from prep table to oven mouth, names beside rotations, timers scrawled and stuck to the wall with tape and intention. He called Paulina, who had just reached her bunk, feet throbbing the way feet do when they have earned the right to complain. "Talk me through heat without gauges," he said. She sat up, sleep shaking off like flour. "Bake by smell," she told him. "When the room smells like the square on the morning we met, count to 500 heartbeats and open. Listen to the loaf when you tap. If it answers like a drum, it's ready to join the band." He put her on speaker. The whole kitchen adopted her as an invisible forewoman. The generator sulked, then found a rhythm. The dough rose as if it understood community is a warm hand. At 2 in the morning, a tray stuck and tore. At 3, steam scalded someone's wrist and was forgiven. At 4, the first perfect loaf sang its hollow song. Photographs began, rows of bread lined like peaceful soldiers, faces slick with sweat and victory, 2 aunties asleep on sacks of flour, a little boy wearing a baker's cap as a crown. Alain sent them to Paulina with a caption, "Proof." She lay on her narrow mattress and cried that quiet cry strong people allow themselves when no one requires more strength. In the morning, Chef Itaundi listened to the story between orders and grunted what, in chef, means respect. "You led from far," he said. "Good dough can cross distance if the hands on both ends are clean." By dawn, 60 loaves cooled like a low hymn. The bride's brother arrived with thanks and money in an envelope that had learned humility. Mama Leah, who still had flour on her cheek, sat heavy on a stool and let tears move without fuss. "We did not feed just a wedding," she said to the room, to the ancestors, to the broken palm outside. "We fed the rumor that we cannot." Alain took a final photo, bread, hands, tired joy, and sent it to Paulina with 3 words: "You were here." She held the phone to her chest the way some people hold medals and thought, fiercely, that any contract that tried to separate her from this exact feeling would be arguing with something older than ink. When Paulina came home next, they turned the square into a small fair without asking permission from any calendar. Alain painted a banner in their bakery blue, wheat and pencil, Paulina times Alain, and tied it between a palm and a persistent signpost. She lit portable ovens that breathed like sleeping cows. He clipped a clothesline between kiosks and pinned quick portraits up with wooden pegs so they fluttered like flags for small empires. She baked city recipes translated into home: cocoa nib boules with the hum of Nkong Samba cocoa, cassava brioche that tasted like old stories learning new steps, coconut palmiers that cracked like kind laughter. He drew 3-minute faces and wrote names in the corners as if each person were a season. People queued, arguing happily about which loaf best carried butter and which sketch made noses too honest. Money became notes that smelled of pockets and work. Thanks arrived in oranges, in invitations to future naming ceremonies, in gossip softened by sugar. The city manager, in sunglasses that mistook dust for snow, drifted through, peeled a palmier into shards of light, and chewed the way rich people chew when considering investments. "You could do this there," she said, gesturing toward an invisible skyline. "We'll give you a corner, a budget, a brand narrative, wheat and pencil by X." She said the last letter like a kiss she intended to put on everything. "X?" Alain asked mildly. "Do brands have to stand where names used to be?" Paulina smiled without showing teeth. "I have a counter-proposal already typed, madam," she said. "It involves my mother's name in permanent ink, my town on the calendar, and my heart not being mortgaged to marketing." The manager laughed, surprised into liking them. "Send it," she said, pocketing a sketch of her own face that Alain had slipped to her for the price of listening. Night found them in the kitchen under the bulb that had seen their first panic and their first victories. Papers sprawled like lazy cats. City contract, Paulina's counter, Alain's drawings with fingerprints of cocoa. He slid a blank sheet toward her with a grin. "Our contract," he said, deadpan official. "Terms? We choose work that keeps us kind. We refuse bigness that hollows the bread. We permit each other to grow in directions that don't fit on posters. We promise a bench, literal or made of 2 chairs and a stubborn imagination. We sign in pencil. We amend when life teaches." She signed with a seriousness that made them both go quiet. He signed with his Skechers squiggle and then added a tiny sheaf of wheat wrapped in a pencil curl, an ampersand made visible. They sealed it with what had become their marriage of gesture. Fingers threaded, foreheads pressed, breath shared but not stolen. Their kiss afterward was less like fireworks and more like embers, deep, sustaining, the kind that warms soup without boiling it away. Outside, the square yawned and settled. Inside, on a scrap of receipt paper, she wrote 3 lines for her official email. "Dear manager, thank you for the opportunity. Attached is my revised proposal, which honors both the bakery's goals and my responsibilities to my family and community. I look forward to building something generous together." She looked at Alain, who was rinsing bowls with a rhythm her body already knew how to dance to, and thought, "Generous is the only brand I can live inside." The bakery accepted her counter with edits that felt like a handshake and not a handcuff. 2 days each week in Douala for R&D and seasonal showcases, 3 days in town for production and training, named credit wherever her recipes traveled, veto rights on images that mispronounced her dignity. "You are a rare negotiator," the manager said on the phone, half teasing, half meaning it. "You are a rare employer," she answered, smiling into the receiver the way you smile at someone who has agreed to see both your ambition and your roots. Chef Itaundi signed a note that read in Chef, "Bring us river bread. Bring us bench bread. Bring us you." They repainted the sign above the bakery door on a Saturday when the sky wore its kind blue. The old letters stayed, their little imperfections kept like freckles you'd never trade, but Alain added an ampersand shaped like a pencil curling into a wheat sheaf, a marriage between line and loaf. Children argued about whether the ampersand was a snake or a road. Aunties declared it fancy but not proud. Mama Leah touched the wood the way some women touch foreheads, applied grateful. "Good," she said, and then, because joy in her house always came yoked to labor, clapped once. "Now bake." The first trays went in. the room filled with the smell that tells even sulking people they are forgiven. Weeks began to carry a rhythm that did not require apology. On Douala days, Paulina experimented, marrying village ingredients to city patience. Sourdough with fermented cassava water, plantain sesame knots with a shy sweetness, peanut-crusted loaves that broke neatly under honest knives. On town days, she and Mama ran workshops for schoolchildren who measured flour with eyes wider than cups and uncles who claimed they didn't bake and left talking about hydration like poets. Alain's mural work multiplied, not billboards but walls that needed stories. The clinic where he painted sickness turning its face toward light. The bus stop where travelers stood under clouds of charcoal birds migrating toward hope. The classroom where he drew a chalk river that changed direction when children pushed it with their hands. On Saturdays they hosted bench hours under the flamboyant tree. She sold, he sketched, and time behaved. People knew to bring both coins and confidences. Lovers came to stand shyly for portraits they didn't yet call engagement. Widows came for bread and left with a drawing of their own hands holding a loaf like a promise that still existed for them. Sometimes, when the square quieted, she and Alain danced their steady two-step on concrete worn smooth, the kind of dance that gives the future less to fear. Their kisses remained what they had decided together. Deep like wells, public like kindness, private like prayer. One evening, twilight burned into gentleness, they climbed to the roof with mugs of tea thickened into dessert. From up there, the sign flashed its blue into the coming night, and the town sounded like itself, taxi arguing kindly with a pothole, a baby discovering volume, the radio across the street insisting on a love song from another decade. Every morning, he said, nose brushing the soft at her temple, the phrase now a liturgy that had followed them from shy promise to practiced vow. Every morning, she echoed, feel of the words warm as a fresh crumb. They pressed foreheads, let gratitude ring through their bones, and stood long enough for the oven timer below to remind them that love, like bread, rewards the people who keep tending the heat. When they went back down, the air that rose to meet them smelled like home, learning new music and staying perfectly, fiercely itself.